She came into town with nothing but her husband's boots stuffed in a saddlebag, and the weight of a past she could not bury. The stagecoach door swung open, and Clara Boone stepped down, her skirt catching dust in the wind. No husband followed her, no family, only the tired eyes of a woman who had walked too far in the dark. Folks turned from their crates and wagons to stare. A widow was a rare sight, and rarer still one who came carrying a deed, and no man to guard it. West Texas, 1883. The land was dry, the sky was restless, and hearts here were harder than mesquite thorns. If you're new here, and these stories of cowboys, widows, and love forged in fire speak to you, I'd ask you kindly, hit that like button, leave your thoughts down below, and subscribe to Apache Love Stories. Every story we tell is carved from dust, survival, and a love that refuses to die. The stagecoach rumbled off, leaving Clara standing with her bundle. She clutched that saddlebag close, and if anyone had looked sharp enough, they'd have seen the old boots sticking out the top. Men's boots, cracked with use. The kind that carried the weight of graves as well as miles. Inside the general store, the air smelled of molasses, leather, and suspicion. Conversations hushed as she stepped inside. A thin man behind the counter leaned forward with a grin too sharp for kindness. "Help you, ma'am?" Clara's voice was even, but strained. "I've come for supplies. I've a homestead out by Keaton Creek." The grin faltered. Whispers spread like tumbleweed fire. Keaton Creek was cursed land, half-starved, argued over by ranchers and thieves alike. Nobody wanted to claim it. Nobody wanted to help the woman who did. That was when Jonas Hale noticed her. He sat near the back, mending tack, silent as stone. He was the sort of man folks forgot was there, until they looked too long and couldn't stop looking. His jaw was rough with days of stubble, his left cheek marred by a scar that curved like a broken river. His hands were large, calloused, scarred from fights that had no winners. Jonas said nothing as Clara placed coins on the counter. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had ridden for 2 days without rest, and the weight of boots and memory, eyes, gray as smoke over a battlefield, met hers without judgment. "Didn't figure you had to." And then, just like that, he turned and walked away, his shadow stretching long across the dirt street. But for Clara, the moment lingered. She didn't trust men, least of all the kind who carried silence heavier than a gun. And yet, something in her chest stirred, a recognition she didn't want but couldn't deny. The boots in her saddlebag felt heavier that day, and Jonas Hale, the scarred drifter, had taken a place in her story she had no intention of writing. The wind carried grit through town, stinging her eyes. She blinked it away, but the vision of that scarred cowboy stayed with her like smoke clinging to a burned house. She came into town with nothing but a dead man's boots. She didn't yet know it, but before the season was through, she would walk the land in her own. Clara Boone had been raised on stubbornness. It was the only inheritance her father had left her, stubbornness and calloused hands. So when the townsfolk smirked at the widow who thought she could hold land alone, she met them with silence and steady eyes. Her first days at the homestead were brutal. The well had gone dry, the fences sagged, and the wind carried dust like a punishment. She wore her husband's boots, too big by half, stomping the parched earth in defiance of every whisper that told her she couldn't last. But even stubbornness has its breaking point. By the third day, the ox she'd borrowed to haul water from the creek gave out, collapsing in the dirt with a groan. Clara tried to heave the yoke free, but the weight crushed her strength. She fell to her knees gasping, the heat searing her lungs. That's when she heard boots crunching gravel. Jonas Hale. He stood over her, shadow cutting against the glare, eyes unreadable. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, arms thick with labor, and a strip of cloth tied around his knuckles from some fight he hadn't bothered to explain. "You'll kill yourself this way," he said. Clara shot him a look sharp enough to cut rawhide. "I didn't ask you to follow me." He crouched, freeing the ox with practiced hands, rubbing its flank until the beast rose. "Didn't follow. Creek's mine too, just happened by." "You always just happen by?" Jonas didn't answer. "Burden. But you look like someone who won't quit." "Reminded me of something." She bristled. Don't mistake me for someone who needs saving." His mouth almost curved into a smile, but didn't. "Didn't say you did." He turned to leave, but Clara's words chased him. "What was it I reminded you of?" Jonas paused. His shoulders rose, then fell. "Someone I failed." He left without another word, boots crunching down the path. Clara stood rooted, her throat tight. She didn't know if she despised him for prying open a wound she'd hidden, or if she despised herself more for wanting to know what haunted him. That night, the homestead carried a new kind of silence. Coyotes cried in the distance. The wind pushed against the sagging barn. Clara sat by the lamplight, letter folded in her lap, the ink smudged from her fingers. Her husband's last words, written before the bullet found him. She read them again, though they never brought comfort. "Keep the land. Redeem my sins." A sound broke the quiet, hooves, fast and cruel. Clara rose, lantern shaking in her hand. Shadows moved outside, voices hushed, laughter sharp. Then came the smell of kerosene. She burst through the door just as fire caught on the barn's outer wall. Flames licked dry wood, hungry and quick. Clara screamed, running with a bucket, but her efforts only spread smoke. The men jeered from the dark. "Should have sold, widow. Keaton doesn't leave scraps for strays." Suddenly a figure surged from the shadows, striking like a storm. Jonas. He moved with the precision of a man who'd fought too long to waste motion. His fists landed heavy, dropping one rider from the saddle. Another swung a rifle. Jonas wrenched it free, cracking wood across the man's jaw. Clara stood frozen, the fire glowing against Jonas's scar. His face cut sharp in the blaze. He fought without rage, only grim purpose, like a man cashing debts he never asked for. The raiders scattered under his assault, curses fading into the night. Jonas snatched a blanket from Clara's porch, smothering the flames until the barn smoked but held. He stood heaving, chest rising and falling, hair damp with sweat and soot. Clara clutched her lantern, knuckles white. "They'll be back." Jonas nodded once. "Then I'll be—" He were surrendering to something unseen. She wondered about the someone he had failed. She wondered if, in her grief and pride, she was already failing herself. Outside, the night pressed close. Inside, two stubborn souls shared a single roof, bound not by trust, but by fire and necessity. And though neither spoke it, both knew the war for Keaton Creek had only begun. Morning came with smoke still clinging to the rafters. Clara Boone rose early, boots laced, apron tied. She found Jonas already outside, splitting wood as if the night's fire and fists had been nothing but a dream. His arms rose and fell, steady, each strike clean and measured. Clara folded her arms, chin lifted. "You said one night." Jonas set another log on the block. The axe bit deep, the sound cracking through the dry air. He didn't look at her when he answered. "Barn still smolders, raiders still ride. I'll stay till it's safe." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need a scarred drifter haunting her yard. But when she looked at the burned edge of her barn, the blackened wood curling like paper, the fight drained from her. "Then you work for your keep," she said at last. Jonas gave a single nod. That was all. In the days that followed, they carved out a rhythm. Jonas fixed fences, dug posts deeper into the hard soil, and hauled water when the ox faltered. Clara cooked beans and cornbread, her hands always busy, her eyes always watching him with a mixture of suspicion and something she refused to name. One afternoon, she found him bent over her husband's old boots, the ones she'd carried in her saddlebag, the ones that had weighed her down since the day she buried him. Jonas had polished them, stitched their cracked leather, and set them by the door. Clara stiffened. "Those aren't yours to touch." Jonas straightened, his gaze steady. "Didn't fix them for me, fixed them for you." She scoffed. "They're too big." "Not anymore." She slipped her feet into them that evening, and though the leather was heavy, the weight felt different. Not a shackle, but a step forward. She didn't thank him, but she wore them. The land was merciless. Heat, what for? Sit. Slowly he obeyed. Their shoulders brushed as she guided his finger over the words. This one, she said softly, is forgive. And this one is mercy. And this one is love. Jonas's finger stilled on the page. His breath shifted. For the first time since she'd known him, his silence felt heavy, not steady. Clara closed the book. That's enough. Neither of them spoke of it again, but the next night, Jonas returned to the table, the Bible already waiting. Gossip spread in town like locusts. The widow Boone and the scarred drifter living under one roof. Whispers sharpened into barbs. Shameful, sinful, desperate. Clara heard them when she went for supplies. She lifted her chin higher each time, refusing to give them satisfaction. But when she returned home, she saw the way Jonas's shoulders stiffened at her silence. He never asked what the townsfolk said. He knew well enough. Instead, he brought her something small, almost foolish: wildflowers. He planted them along the edge of her homestead, yellow blooms against the parched earth. Clara watched him on his knees in the dirt, calloused hands cradling fragile stems. When he rose, she shook her head. They'll die in this heat. Jonas shrugged. So will we, if we don't try. For the first time in months, Clara laughed. It startled them both. Their intimacy grew in the quietest of ways. The way Jonas always left half his plate untouched, pushing it toward her when he thought she wouldn't notice. The way Clara mended the tear in his shirt, pretending it was only for decency's sake. Once in the middle of the night, a storm rattled the windows and Clara woke with a cry. Jonas was there in an instant, standing in her doorway, chest rising and falling. "You all right?" he asked. Clara pressed a hand to her heart. "Dreams, that's all." He didn't move until she nodded, and even then she heard him drag a chair across the floor, sitting sentinel in the hall until morning. But trust is a fragile thing, and, like wildflowers, it can be crushed under careless feet. One evening, after a long day mending fences, Clara spoke the thought that had been gnawing at her. "Why are you really here, Jonas?" He looked at her, brow furrowed. "You could have moved on."
"And afford to. And yet, when I walk the land in my husband's boots, I no longer feel alone." She closed the book, set it aside, and listened to Jonas moving about outside, his boots steady on the dirt. For the first time since she'd buried her husband, Clara Boone felt something bloom inside her chest. Not safety, not peace. Something more dangerous. Hope. The desert has a way of keeping score. Every kindness, every cruelty, every secret whispered to its red canyons eventually comes back around. For Elias and Rose, the reprieve of their fragile peace was about to be tested by forces larger than themselves. By suspicion, by law, and by the desert's hunger for truth. The winter sun was slipping down, casting long shadows through the cottonwoods, when the first signs of trouble appeared. Hoofprints, fresh, deep, and too many for chance. Elias crouched low, brushing the edges of the tracks with his fingertips, his jaw tightening. "Soldiers," he muttered. "6, maybe 7. Rose's heart stilled. "Here?" He gave her a sharp look, not in anger but in warning. "Word's traveling. Somebody's been talking. Maybe the ranch hand saw us. Maybe it's just bad luck. Either way, we don't have much time." For nights they had lived like ghosts, slipping through mesquite and arroyo, surviving off prickly pear and creek water. Their silence had become a language all its own. But now silence was no longer safety. It was the echo of pursuit. That night, as the fire burned low, Rose sat staring into the flames. Elias worked at sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scrape filling the hush between them. Finally, she spoke. "You don't have to keep me here. If they catch us, it'll be worse for you." Elias looked up, eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. "Don't ever say that again. You've already risked enough." "I made my choice the night I cut you loose," he interrupted, voice low but fierce. "This ain't about risk anymore. It's about right and wrong. I ain't letting them take you back. Not now, not ever."
The conviction in his words hit her harder than any bullet. She turned away, blinking fast, pretending to poke at the fire. The truth was, part of her longed to believe. Ridges. Soldiers. Rifles across their saddles. One of them carried a coil of rope. Rose's breath came fast against his palm. She could smell the leather of his gloves, the sweat and dust clinging to him. When he finally released her, she whispered, "If they find us—" "They won't," Elias said, though his hand hovered close to his revolver. His voice was steady, but his pulse hammered in his throat. They waited until the riders passed. Then Elias led her up the rocks, every step measured, silent, desperate. At the top, the desert stretched before them in endless waves of stone and sand, beautiful, merciless, alive with danger. That night, safe in a shallow cave, Rose finally broke. "I can't keep running," she whispered, clutching her knees to her chest. "I've been running all my life, from hunger, from men who thought they could own me, from soldiers who killed my kin, and now—" She looked at him, eyes glistening in the dim firelight. "Now I'm running with you." Elias crouched beside her, his shadow stretching long against the cave wall. His hand hovered, then gently settled on her shoulder. "You ain't running with me," he said softly. "You're standing with me. That's different." Rose let out a shaky laugh that was half a sob. "And if we can't stand?" "Then we fall together," Elias replied. No hesitation, no doubt. The cave went quiet except for the crackle of fire. In that silence, something broke loose inside Rose. Not fear, not despair, but a strange kind of surrender. Not to Elias, but to the truth. She was no longer alone. But the desert doesn't let go so easily. At dawn, the sound of distant gunfire rolled across the mesas. Elias stiffened, hand on his revolver, eyes searching the horizon. A warning, a promise. Rose reached for him instinctively, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "They're closer." He nodded once, "which means we're running out of choices." They packed quickly, waterskins, jerky, his rifle, her blanket. As they stepped out of the cave, the first sliver of sun split the canyon, painting the world in fire. Elias pulled her close, his voice a low growl meant only for her. "Whatever happens next, Rose, don't you—" Of survival, sacrifice, and love on the frontier. The desert gave no quarter. By the fourth day of pursuit, Elias and Rose could feel the land itself turning against them. Their water was low, their bodies raw from sun and wind, and every sound of hoofbeats carried the same promise: the end was near. They pushed through a dry wash, mesquite branches clawing at their arms. The sun was sinking low, the horizon bleeding red. Elias stopped suddenly, raising his hand. Rose froze, her breath sharp. Across the arroyo, silhouettes moved, soldiers on horseback, rifles slung, scanning the rocks. 6 of them, maybe more in the distance, their faces caught in the dying sun, grim with purpose. "They've cut us off," Elias whispered. His voice carried the gravel of inevitability. "We can't outrun 'em now." Rose's heart slammed against her ribs. "Then what do we do?" Elias turned, meeting her eyes with a look that was equal parts steel and sorrow. "We stand." They scrambled up the rocks, finding cover in the jagged ridges above the wash. Elias checked his revolver, spun the cylinder, snapped it shut. His rifle leaned ready against the stone. Rose crouched beside him, clutching a small knife he had given her nights ago. She wasn't a fighter. She had no illusions. But if they came close enough, she wouldn't go back in chains. The soldiers dismounted below, their boots crunching on gravel. The leader, a broad man with a scar down his cheek, shouted up into the rocks. "Wyatt, we know you're up there." His voice cracked like a whip. "Hand over the girl, and maybe the law will show you mercy." Rose's blood chilled. She gripped Elias's sleeve. "Wyatt?" she whispered. Elias's jaw tensed, but his eyes never left the canyon floor. "They ain't after me," he said low. "They're after us." The soldiers spread out, rifles ready. The leader barked again. "She's property of the United States now. You stole from the army, and there's a price to pay." Rose's throat burned. Property. The word cut deeper than any blade. Her hands shook with rage and terror. Elias leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "You hear me, Rose? You're no man's property, not theirs, not mine. You're free. Don't you praying, trembling, the knife slick in her palm. She wanted to scream, to run, but Elias's presence steadied her. His figure against the twilight was unbreakable, carved from grit and fire. "Stay low," he barked, firing another shot. A soldier spun and dropped. But for every one that fell, more pressed forward. They moved with precision, flanking, climbing higher up the rocks. The scar-faced leader raised his revolver, his eyes locked on Elias. The shot rang out. Elias staggered, dropping to one knee. Blood bloomed dark against his shirt. "Elias!" Rose cried, grabbing his arm. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. "I'm fine," he growled, though his face was pale. He fired again, hitting another man, but his movements were slower now, weaker. The soldiers closed in. Rose's mind spun, panic clawing at her chest. If Elias fell, she'd be taken, dragged back to chains, to silence, to nothing. Something inside her snapped. With a cry that was half fury, half despair, Rose leapt from cover, knife flashing in her hand. She darted down the rocks, straight toward one of the soldiers climbing near. The man swore, raising his rifle, but she was faster. She drove the blade into his arm, ripping it free as he screamed and dropped his weapon. The others turned, stunned. "Rose!" Elias roared, but his voice was choked with pain. She scrambled back up the rocks, blood on her hands, wild with fear and fire. She slid beside him, chest heaving. "You fool!" Elias rasped, but his eyes burned with something like pride. "They'll have to kill me first," Rose spat. "I won't go back." The battle dragged on. Smoke stung their eyes, rifles cracked, screams echoed off the stone. The sun slipped fully behind the mesas, plunging the canyon into shadow. Then, in the lull between volleys, they heard it, the distant thunder of hooves. More soldiers? Reinforcements? Elias's face hardened. No time left. He pushed the rifle into Rose's hands. "Take it." Her eyes widened. "I don't know how. Point and squeeze. Don't think. Don't hesitate." She stared at him, trembling, then nodded. The scar-faced leader called again, his voice echoing. "Last chance, Wyatt. Hand her over, or..." Only the scar-faced leader remained. He stood at the canyon floor, revolver aimed straight at Elias. His smile was cold, cruel. "You can't win, Wyatt," he snarled. "You'll die here, and she'll be ours again." Rose's blood ran cold. She raised the rifle, hands steady despite the tremor in her soul. Not again, never again. She fired. The leader's body jerked, then crumpled to the dirt. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged gasps of Elias's breath. The canyon was still, smoke drifted, bodies lay scattered below like broken shadows. Rose dropped the rifle, rushing to Elias's side. His shirt was soaked with blood, his face pale as moonlight. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her hands to his wound. "Stay with me, Elias, please." His eyes flickered open, a weak smile tugging at his lips. "Told you, we'd stand together." "Don't you dare leave me," she choked, tears streaking her dust-stained face. "Not after this, not after everything." He lifted a shaking hand, brushing her cheek. "Then don't let me go." Rose clutched his hand to her face, her whole body trembling. Never. The desert had taken its price in blood, but in the ashes of the fight, something stronger had risen. Love that chose to fight, to bleed, to endure. As the stars wheeled overhead, Rose sat with Elias cradled against her, whispering promises into the night. They had stood together, and no matter what came next, they had chosen each other. Dawn rose slow and quiet over the canyon, as if even the sun hesitated to disturb what had been lost in the night. Smoke clung to the rocks, carrying with it the bitter scent of powder and blood. The ground below was littered with the still bodies of men who had ridden hard into the desert, thinking they could claim it. The desert had claimed them instead. At the edge of a cold fire pit, Rose knelt beside Elias. His breath was shallow, but steady, his skin pale against the crimson stain that spread across his shirt. She pressed fresh cloth to the wound, whispering prayers in a language older than the land itself. Her hands shook, but she did not falter. "You're not leaving me," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Not after all this. Not after you gave me back my name." Elias stirred, his lips evening. Under a sky painted with firelight and stars, Elias shifted, groaning, trying to sit up. Rose pressed him back gently, scolding, "You'll tear the stitches." He chuckled, though it ended in a cough. "You sound like a wife." The words caught her by surprise. A warmth spread through her chest, fierce and tender all at once. She didn't answer, just brushed the hair from his forehead and leaned close. "Then maybe I'll keep sounding like one." When Elias could finally stand again, they left the canyon together. No soldiers followed, no lawmen rode. The desert, in its strange, ruthless way, had granted them silence. They walked side by side through fields of wild sage and golden grass, the horizon stretching wide and free before them. Every step forward was a step away from chains, from blood, from fear. At the crest of a low hill, Rose stopped, gazing out at the endless plain. Wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of rain in the distance. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a future. Elias slid an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. His voice was hoarse but steady. "World's still ugly, still cruel, but maybe out there," he nodded to the horizon, "maybe there's a corner of it we can make our own." Rose leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper, not tamed, just chosen. He smiled at that, pressing his lips to her temple. "Chosen suits me fine." They didn't ride back to town, didn't turn toward any road the soldiers would know. Instead, they followed the rivers, the hills, the stars, charting a path all their own. Wherever they stopped, the desert bloomed around them in small, stubborn ways, wildflowers pushing through rock, cactus fruit sweet against the tongue, coyotes howling in the distance, like guardians of their secret. Their love was not carved in churches or written in books. It was carved in scars, in blood spilled and saved, in whispered vows under endless skies. And in the quiet, when the fire burned low and the desert wind sang through the grass, Elias would take her hand and remind her of the truth they had fought for. She was never tamed, she was chosen. If this story touched your heart, saddle up with us for more. Hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your favorite